Hello and welcome to the Data Idol Summer School. Thank you very much for joining us today, wherever you are in the world. I'm David Lachlan. I'm the founder at Data Idols and also one of the co-organisers at the Data Science Festival. The Data Idol Summer School is something we've been working on for a number of weeks, number of months now. We've gathered together 36 different speakers from within our community to put together a boot camp that people can use to progress their knowledge within the data world. Starts off with introduction to Python, SQL, Excel, R, etc., and then builds from there. We've been very lucky to be very well supported in pulling together the summer school. It's thanks to the forward-thinking support of all of the speakers and their companies, which you can see in front of you now, giving up their time to create this content to share with the community. In terms of accessing that content, we're running it live. While we are running it live, there's a Slack channel, which would be great to have you all on board. If you're watching live, come and say hello. It is also available on demand. So if you're watching it in your own time, again, hope you're enjoying the content and look forward to hearing a bit of feedback from you actually. In terms of today's talk is Data Storytelling as a Visualization. It's presented by Dr. Rob, one of our good friends within the data community, and you guys are in for a real treat. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session on data storytelling and visualization. My name is Dr. Rob Mastrodomenico, and during this session today, what we're going to kind of talk about is using data to tell stories, how you kind of talk around data, kind of lessons that you should have around that, and the concept of visualization and how important that is when you're looking at, telling a story and why it can be good and also why it can be bad and kind of things you need to think about. Now, in terms of today, what I'm looking to cover is I'm going to talk a bit about me and why necessarily I should even be speaking about this. My background around kind of communication of, concepts in a kind of data-driven world. We're going to talk about why tell stories with data, so why you need to do it, and the key points to communication. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about visualization as a tool. Now, this session and this talk, it's really around getting you to think about how you tell your stories, how you communicate them, because it's a really kind of key concept that I think can sometimes be lost, and the importance of you guys as data scientists, data practitioners, and how you kind of tell stories just even to people within, where you work, what you do. And so I'll get started by talking about me, and we'll kind of go on this journey and kind of see where we go. And hopefully you guys will kind of learn a bit about effective ways to kind of communicate what you work on. So my kind of primary background is a data scientist. I hold a PhD in applied statistics. I have 15 years of experience of actually practicing data science. But as kind of part of that, I became a statistical ambassador of the Royal Statistical Society. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know. What that was that was an initiative that was set up a few years ago to bring them people who are, good communicators of kind of statistical data concepts who could kind of work on behalf of the society and communicate kind of concepts within the media or to whomever. And I was one of the initial kind of people on this, and I'd been doing talks on kind of a lot of my work. My background was kind of sports and the application of data science to that. So it lended itself well to kind of talks, and people were interested in that area. And so I joined the kind of initiative and was given a degree of training, and then went away and did a lot of communication work and communicating technical concepts to a variety of people. So I've done TV interviews, radio interviews, podcasts, I've appeared in print. So for example, I think the big thing that I did that was more kind of luck than judgment was I did the press release when the National Lottery changed their numbers from they increased the numbers by 10. So we had 10 more numbers in the national lottery. And so a journalist wanted a quote for a paper story. I did it as part of this. And then that kind of took off because I made the extremely astute call that actually increasing the numbers would make it harder to win. And a bit like Nostradamus, I was correct. People didn't win. There was massive amounts of rollovers. And then everyone wanted to talk about it. And I appeared on BBC Breakfast, BBC News, BBC World News, pretty much every radio station the BBC had, and others non-BBC. I was in The Guardian, The Telegraph, most of the national newspapers talking. I was quoted on this story because I was the press release. And so I had to do, and I had to learn how to do TV interviews, learn how to do radio interviews. And subsequently, I've done more of these. And there are kind of lessons that I've learned through being part of this initiative, but also just from kind of communication and what I've kind of done around it and experience. And one of the big kind of takeaways of this talk is experience does help, but you don't have to be experienced to do it. Let's kind of move on and say why we tell stories with data. Well, we're a more data-driven society than ever. I think, especially over the last 10 years, the boom in kind of data and the use of data within companies, media, the world as we know it, we are carrying around us devices in our phones that send out so much data, so much kind of data to different applications, to different places. We're giving our data away. There's data being collected on us all the time. And so the use of data is huge, and it's led to the boom in essentially data science and the need to understand that data. But with that kind of comes the need to communicate it, the need to tell stories. And I think that concept of telling stories can sometimes be misleading. Like, I'm not trying to write a new Avengers film in the data science context. What I want to do when I'm telling stories, I want to tell you what's going on with the data that I'm working on, with the project, with the concept, with whatever I've got. And my kind of belief is it's the science in data science that can be complicated. And it's that kind of ability to talk around that and make that accessible to people that is the key of communicating. So that's, as kind of data scientists and people who need to communicate, that's our kind of key aim. Because a lot of people, if we take the example of COVID, we've spent a long time looking and hearing about data on COVID, number of cases, number of deaths, number of hospitalizations. It's really kind of that data side of it's played such a huge role in what our lives are. And the way it's been communicated, whether you like it or whether you don't like it, is something now that we're used to. And people talk about things like R numbers, concepts that are scientific, and the ability to get an understanding of what these numbers mean, what the data means, is something that's been kind of put on the people who've dealt with that. And those kind of, if we take, a much smaller thing of something that maybe we're working on, or which may even be big as well, but the ability to communicate those to people is key. And I think as data scientists, it's not always kind of talked about that the communication is important, and how we communicate what we do to people in and out of the areas that we work in. So I'm not here to kind of be the oracle of communication and presentation and tell you exactly, do as I do. But I think there are some skills that, people who maybe wouldn't feel confident can kind of take. And so this slide's Communication 101. And these are the kind of basics that I believe that, anybody can kind of pick up. And this isn't, some crazy self-help system. This is just from myself, from people I've worked with who've done communication, from people who I've kind of seen develop from it, things that I've seen happen to them. And the big one is communication skills can be developed. I'm not a believer that I was anything special when I was doing TV interviews or radio interviews. I don't think I'm the greatest communicator out there. I think I'm good at it. I understand how it works, but I've also worked at it. You know, I've done lots of things. And I think the three things underneath kind of link themselves to it. So confidence is really important. To be confident when you speak is going to make people want to listen to what you've got to say. And the kind of concept of confidence, it's not, you know, you don't have to be on stage singing and dancing. It's not, you know, look at me confidence. I don't think. It's just being confident in what you're delivering, that you understand it. And I think the kind of key points to building that confidence are understanding the concept that you're talking about. And that sounds really stupid. It's like, if you've been working on something, surely you understand the concept. Well, I'd kind of take this. If you think about something that you've worked on, could you explain, from a kind of data science point of view, could you explain it to a member of your family with no background in data science, anything like that? Could you explain it in a way that they can understand? If you can't, then maybe you don't understand the concept enough to communicate it. And someone said this to me ages ago about a really kind of common, you know, statistical concept, and I couldn't explain it. I knew how it worked. I used it every day, but because I'd never had to explain it, I wasn't able to. And then I kind of worked out a way that I could explain that concept. I was like, cool, I get it a bit more in terms of, you know, what this means and, you know, what everything is that we're looking at. And so I kind of think that's key. And with that comes practice and preparation. You don't get any kind of, the better you'll get is the more you'll do it. And you're going to have to prepare and you're going to have to practice. I've probably been doing talks, I don't know, 10, 15 years now. Probably most of my working career, I've always been out there doing talks, whether it was talks to kind of, as a kind of, when I'm working to people we want to bring into the company, talks about my research, talks about a variety of things. Every talk is practice, as in I'm learning from it, I'm getting better. And I have to prepare, and I prepare differently now than I did, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. I don't have to necessarily do as much, but I've got experience, and experience helps. And it's not like, it's exactly the same if you're a sportsman, if you were a performer or even if you're just doing any job, you know, you have to get better at it by doing it. And if you're not that confident in presenting, then I think the best way to get around it is to start doing something, start doing things on it. And that, you know, the more practiced you are, the more prepared you are, the more confident you'll be. And the more you understand your concept, the more confident you'll be that nothing's going to go wrong. I wouldn't say, from my point of view, that in doing any kind of talk, I'm never not nervous. I think nerves are great, but in the right way. And so I think you can keep developing all of these skills. And if you're not a confident speaker, if you don't feel you're any good, don't shy away from it. Try and do stuff. And it doesn't have to be big things, you know, baby steps. If we talk about understanding concepts, see if you can talk to someone about a concept that you've got in a way that's not going to put you under any pressure. And then when you get that opportunity to do it, you'll be much more confident doing it. Easy for me to say, I know. But that kind of leads to the talking to non-experts. And this is a big part, because I think maybe a while ago, or people would consider talking to non-experts to be a binary. He doesn't know what they don't know what they're talking about. They do know what they're talking about. And, you know, when you're talking to a non-expert, it's a complete somebody who knows nothing about anything that you do. I kind of look at it a little bit differently, in terms of, I think the expert to non-expert scale is not binary. It's much more nuanced. And actually, you're going to have people, the expert in what you do is you, and the non-experts are most likely everyone else. There might be a few others who you work with or do things with who are experts in what you do, but actually a lot of other people, even if they know what you're doing, would be considered non-experts. So I would say people may understand your field. So you might be a data scientist, but not your area. So you could think about speaking at a conference on data science, or some kind of data science festival, for example. And people would know data science and the basics, but they may not know the area that you're working on. And therefore, they're non-expert to what you're doing, even though they can understand some of it. And others may understand your area, but not your field. So you might be speaking at a specific, say, medical conference, and you're presenting some work that is broadly data science based. But you have to communicate the data science part alongside the area. Now, the right pitch to your audience is crucial, because it's going to be, you don't necessarily want to get the audience, you need to make sure you're covering the right areas for the people that you're talking to. And so what you kind of need to do is get your story in a way that you want it to be. So if we kind of consider you're talking to somebody who's in your field but not your area, it doesn't necessarily mean you just gloss over everything to do with the data science and just concentrate all on the application, because they're there to learn about the data science you use. So you need to make sure that everything kind of works with the bits they know and the bits they don't know. Similarly, if people understand your area but not your field, you can't just talk about the data science because that you assume they know your area. You need to link the two up, because you need to get them to understand it. And you need to do it in a way that people can understand it. So if we kind of consider that, if you don't understand data science, but you understand the area, can you use the fact that they understand the area you're working in to make them better understand the data science? And this goes back to that kind of concept of your story. And I always think the way you prepare to talk and what you're going to talk about is really important, because in reality, you can kind of think of any presentation having a kind of start, a middle, and an end. And really, the start and the end are quite easy. Like, when I do a presentation or any kind of talk, I know broadly what I want to say at the start and what I want to say at the end. But you need to fill the bit in the middle. And it's that kind of journey there that's going to be key, and how you present it and the level you pitch it at. Because if you don't get all the elements right, or don't get it at the right level for who you're talking to, people will disengage. And so we're going to kind of talk a bit more about the different types of ways that you would present, and who you would talk to, and some kind of things around what you might want to think about. And I'm going to kind of look at these three. So the first two are going to hopefully be things that are going to be really common to most people. The third, obviously, not so much. But we're going to talk about presentations. So doing a presentation, how you're going to tell the story around your data based on your presentation. We're then going to talk about meetings. How you get your point across in a meeting is different to a presentation, because a presentation usually has a fixed amount of time. You have a degree of control. A meeting may not be. You may have some time, but you may also, have to get across a concept within a meeting to people in a way that you don't know exactly how that's going to go. And lastly, media, which I don't necessarily think is something everyone may want to do, but it becomes more common now with so many media outlets, and even things like Twitter, LinkedIn, stuff like that, where you're getting your kind of ideas out to people. If you're trying to communicate what you want to a wider audience, how you do that and what you need to think about. So presentations. So I don't think I'm speaking out of line, but people have short attention spans. I have a moderately short attention span if you cannot keep me engaged. But that is the key. Really, as a speaker, as a presenter, you want to keep your audience engaged. Now, one thing I would say is when I go to a talk or I'm listening to a presentation, I'm generally there because I want to be there. There's something that's on offer that appeals to me. And I think that's true to most people. It's like you wouldn't go to the cinema to see a film randomly because you just want to see a film. I'd probably go and see a film of which I have some interest in. Some films I'm going to be really interested in, others I might not know much about, but I want to give it a try. So there's something there already to get me to go to that cinema. It's very much like a presentation. There's something in what you're speaking about which appeals to the people in your audience, and they've given up their time to go there. So you already won them over initially. And I think people worry about that, what people will necessarily think about, will they walk out on what I'm doing? It rarely happens, but people want to be there. And I think when you do a presentation, having that kind of mindset of, well, people have come to see me, they want to see this. So all I have to do is present in a way to keep them engaged is a much better way to think of it. And a big part of that is the delivery style. Now, when you talk, and this goes back to kind of communication 101, there are things that you can do to kind of keep your audience engaged. So if I really want to speak really fast, I'm going to say every word really quickly, and then you won't be able to understand anything that I say. Or I can speak very, very slowly. Now, there's kind of two different approaches to how you deliver, but actually neither really work to be one pace or to be the other. So some people will be really fast. They speak pretty quickly. Others might speak more slowly. There's no problem with it, but being over fast or being over slow is generally not good. My kind of approach is to just mix it up a bit. Let things breathe. Don't be afraid of the silence. Because people have come to see you, it doesn't mean you have to talk all the time. You don't have to fill every second with a word. If you need to breathe, if you need to have a drink, have a drink. And I think the mixture between fast and slow and stop and start, it keeps people engaged because they don't know what's coming. And being natural, I think, is really key. And that's hard because being natural when you speak isn't something that you would automatically assume it comes easy. A lot of people will kind of have a presentation voice, right? A style they do it. But the more natural you can be, I always find the more engaging you will be, because you'll just be talking about it as a person. So the way I present isn't too far away from the way I'd normally speak. I'll obviously change things up a bit in terms of the way I would speak and where I would leave breaks and where I will speed up and slow down. But most of it's just natural. And I think that kind of makes the whole talk more engaging because I'm just having a conversation with you. And when you're doing a presentation, I kind of think that having a conversation with your audience and telling them about what you were doing is as if you were talking to a family member, or you were down the pub, if we can go to pubs, with people and just talking about things generally. It's just going to make it much better and people will engage better with it. The other thing, which I think is very, very important, is the content of your story and the structure. Now, lots of times I've seen presentations, and I do it all the time. I go to a talk and I love it when people leave the bit in the bottom corner which says how many slides of how many slides. And I immediately would judge that presentation based on the number of slides and the time they've got allotted to it. I always think less is more. So let's go through a few bits. Keep it simple in terms of when you're telling your story, you don't need everything to be there all the time. I don't need to see every single thing you've done. I'm already there because I've got an interest. So just give me enough to kind of tell your story. You don't have to kind of give me reams and reams of dialogue. I think in cinema terms, like the Basil expedition of explaining everything and how it works. I can take a bit of mystery. I don't need to know everything that you're going to say and why it's that way. I'm prepared to go out, and this is a personal point of view, but I think it's fairly well held, is I would be prepared if this was interesting enough and I wanted to learn more about it. And keep it simple. I rarely will put an equation in anything I do anymore. I just don't see the point. If I've got a paper or a book or something I've written or a website or web link, I'll point them to that for more information. But actually, in general, complicated equations, that doesn't help. Lots and lots of equations doesn't help. And lots of slides doesn't help. If you can't talk around your slide, then you're just going to be rushing through to show lots and lots of content. And whilst you'll be giving people lots of things, actually, they're not going to be able to understand or take in what you're doing. It's much better to let it breathe. And I think a key part of that is visualization. And we're going to look a bit about visualization later and talk about it. But visualization, as opposed to words, is a much better way of kind of communicating something that might be complicated, a lot of data into a single plot, or something that people can look at and take in, or any kind of thing that moves away from standard bullet points. But talk around your presentation. Don't necessarily just read what's on the presentation. So we don't necessarily, I don't want to hear somebody verbatim tell me every bullet point they've got. And if you're paying attention to this presentation, I generally keep every bullet point to a few words. More so because I'm using it as my jumping off point to talk about the concepts that I want to talk about. I'm not using it as something that you need to necessarily make notes on. And you don't, a good presentation generally is something you wouldn't make notes on, I think, or you could just maybe make a few mental notes. You don't have to copy down loads of stuff from slides. You know, I always think that makes for a much better presentation than if I'm just trying to copy down every word that someone's put. And I'm essentially drinking it in. I'm learning from what they're telling me. And have a few key points you want to deliver. This is an ongoing theme throughout this presentation. The kind of how you deliver a data-driven story is not unlike how you deliver any story, but you just need to understand the parts you need people to get. And they're not going to be able to take in too many like nuanced stuff. They probably need 2 or 3 things that they need as a takeaway from this. And this links into other forms of communication. But if you understand that and you understand what you want to get across and you keep it simple and you don't go over the top, you're going to be much more effective as a communicator, as a presenter, because everything else is going to be geared around the points that you want them to know. And you know, I've got a few in this. I want you to come away with a few key points, and this is one of them. That, you know, don't over deliver. Don't try and give me too much in the time frame that you're trying to present something in, and leave me wanting more. You know, I wouldn't mind. I don't think it's bad to go and watch a presentation and at the end say that was really interesting. I'm going to find out more about it, as opposed to, man, they covered every single thing. I got lost halfway through it. If you can kind of get across your concept and what you're trying to do, it's going to be much more effective to kind of engage people in what you're kind of discussing. That's you know, personal preference, but you know, I think all good speakers keep it simple, and you know, people who are much smarter than me when they do presentations keep it much more simple, because they understand that people will get more out of it if they can all understand it. And even those who are, you know, really clever people appreciate a simple presentation as well, because they can think about it and get their own kind of thoughts from it. That's presentations, and we'll kind of that's more kind of slide-based, talk-based, those types of presentations. A meeting is slightly different. I always find, especially these days, the COVID times, you know, the amount of meetings that people are on all the time, and communication aspect of that, and how you get your point across is not too different from how you would present if you're doing a proper presentation. I just think the rules are slightly different, because you might not have a set amount of time in a meeting. You might be part of a meeting and you may have essentially a few key points you want to deliver. And I think understanding that before you go into a meeting or before that meeting starts is important, because you may not be able to do all that in one hit. You may have, you know, 2 or 3 times that you can speak in a meeting that you can then work on getting your point across. But a lot of kind of what we've covered so far when we look at presentations is exactly the same. Less is more. You know, in a meeting of, you know, whether it's face-to-face, on video conferencing, wherever it is, people kind of don't want to necessarily overstay their welcome, or they shouldn't want to. And I think you probably have it yourself. If people talk for the sake of talking, it generally doesn't really solve things. So keep what you want simple, keep it brief. Less is more. And if you know those points, when you work that into what you want to say, and it's not necessarily just a case of, hey guys, I need you to know point 1, point 2, point 3. Find a way of how you're going to communicate that in a way that people will understand, and get out of that a couple of those key points that you want to get across. And if you can kind of keep it to that, then you'll be much more effective with your communication. And it's that kind of start, stop, where you may be able to come in and out, and you may not get, say, a fixed amount of time. You may be waiting for an opportunity to speak. It's the ability, when you do get the opportunity, to make the most of it and be concise, but be precise. And, you know, it goes back to that kind of 101 practice, preparation. If you're prepared and you know what you want to say, when you get the chance to say it, you're much more likely to say it in a way that's going to be more effective for people to understand. And again, meetings, whether it's within your team and you're trying to get across what you're working on, or it's to non-experts who don't know what you're working on, but you need to communicate a concept of that. This kind of stuff is really important, and that verbal communication, which is a skill, you know, people wouldn't always associate with data practitioners, data scientists. You know, it's something that if we have it, we can be much more effective, because the work that people will do in data science has huge outreach and huge reach within that company or within where you're working, because people are much influenced by the data. The data is driving the decisions that are being taken. So being able to effectively communicate that is key. Now, I'm going to link this lastly in terms of the kind of communication side back to kind of media and my experiences, because a lot of this just is the same thing. And so in media, if you're going to do a radio interview, radio interviews are tough, because you can't see the person a lot of the time. You might be on the phone, you might have, you know, and you might be multiple people, and you don't know when you're going to get asked a question. You have no control over the situation. And so you need to really, this is a lot like a meeting, but you need to prepare the points you want to get across, how you're going to get it across. And the same things we kind of had within the meetings, exactly the same things that we've got here. But I have the key points you want to get across as the first bullet on this, because you need to really be nailed on, because you might only get 30 seconds on the radio. And so you need to know how you're going to get that point across. And again, you've got to keep it simple, because most people listening aren't, these are going to be the non-experts of non-experts, that probably casual listeners. They might like the topic, but the actual, what you're talking about may make no sense to them, or they may have no interest in it. For example, probably one of the last interviews I did was on the Euros tournament we just had, where England did quite well by getting to the final. And I think midway through, people were asking me about, it was before we had the last 16 draw, and how the chances are of teams, who's going to win it, who's more likely to win it statistically, what are England's chances. So everyone's engaged in that regard, but they're not necessarily that engaged with the science. So you have to make it kind of work around it and have your key points of what you want to get across. And, in that point, the concept of randomness, how the draw affects the simulation of, where people are going to finish, and the fact England are playing at home, had home advantage in a lot of games. They were kind of three key points I wanted to get across. And, if people understood that, then what that would mean is they would have a better understanding of what the chance of England winning this are, and why, this is a big tournament for them, and why people should be hopeful that, England could do well, which, again, I'd said they would be quite good, and they were. But, I wouldn't say it was anything revolutionary, but I had to get that across that point. And more so, and I've put be natural. I think be natural in every case, but especially when you're on any kind of media, TV, radio, be yourself, because generally you're not leading it then. And that's probably the bigger thing. When, bigger difference is, if you did a TV interview or radio interview or a podcast, you're generally at the whim of the host and the producers who are doing that, who are going to kind of allow you to speak by asking you questions leading in. They're not just going to give you the floor to say what you want. So, and they want it to be good. And I think, again, this links back to everything we've just spoken about. People, if they go to a presentation, they want you to be good. If you go to a meeting, generally people want to hear what you've got to say. If you're doing a media appearance, they want that to be entertaining, good, and informative. The goodwill is always there. I think when it can go wrong is when people aren't confident in what they're doing, and therefore it doesn't come out as well. And I think everything leads back to that kind of 101 of confidence. And confidence and presentation, communication skills can be developed, and the confidence will help with that. And the confidence will come from that practice, the preparation, and understanding. And so all of these things kind of come together, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, those are kind of all the same. Now, we've talked about the kind of the verbal presentation and how that works, and that's great. Having the verbal skills is really, really kind of important, because ultimately I think communicating what you work on, what you're doing is a big part of any kind of data scientist skill set. But a big one is visualization, because this is something that's not so necessarily communication from a speaking point of view, but can kind of help you get across your point. And visualization as a concept is very powerful. We can put lots of information into a single image. And that's one of the bigger things. I've seen presentations where people will do like table after table after table. They'll have a massive table with loads of results in. And you're looking at it, you're like, I can't work that out. In my head, it doesn't make sense. Too much data. I can't process this. And they might be able to process, you might need like 10 minutes to process that table. But in a presentation, you don't have that. Or if you're trying to get a point across, you may not have that amount of time. People will just not engage with it. A visualization, on the other hand, can engage people, can get the point across when done correctly in a way that's really fast and really powerful. Used correctly, it's a really, really powerful tool. And I'm a big fan of, more visualizations in presentations, people looking at creating cool visualizations to support their story. It just helps, but used incorrectly, it can be less than powerful. And I've got a couple of examples I just want to go through to show you how this can be good and not so good. So we're going to start off with this bad example, and this is a great example. I didn't find this example. This was shown to me a long time ago. This is from Fox News, and this is a pie chart that they did. And like it's pie charts as a whole, I'm not a huge fan of. I think especially for something like this, a bar chart or even just a table of something is fine. And we'll kind of talk a bit more about it later, but it's just really kind of embarrassing in terms of the numbers with the pie chart. But if you took the numbers out, what does that pie chart mean? Ideally, what's the message you're trying to get across here? And I think when you're visualizing, easy for me to say, any kind of data, thinking back to what is the message I want to get out of this? How is this going to support or fit into my story? What were they hoping this visualization was going to prove? Was it supposed to prove that it is really tight between all three individuals? Or because I can't really tell without those numbers what that means. And with the numbers, it's absolutely ludicrous. But you need to think about what this means, what you want your visualization to say about what you're doing. And obviously this is a bad example, and there will be bad examples where people won't necessarily understand what they're doing. And this, it might have been a really pressurized environment where they had to get something out onto that. But this was, not the greatest that I've ever seen. This, though, is probably one of the best examples of data visualization. And I haven't got the live one in here, and I would recommend people go out and check this out. Hans Rosling produced a plot on kind of population and how it changed over time. And this plot was brilliant. And you can build these plots yourself. This used data, and through time, the bubbles would change, the sizes would change, and you would see what was happening with the data set that he had. And so what he was able to capture in a single plot, and he does a talk around it. So, you can find it on YouTube. There's a TED talk that I think he's done on this, and he's done it elsewhere. It's really, really good and a really, really strong use of visualization, because what he's taken is the huge amounts of data that would be really hard to communicate in a way where people would be able to understand it, because there's so many different variables going on and so much change that the best way to do it was through a plot which changed through time. And the plot told the story, and he could talk around the plot, which did the hard work for him. The plot was doing all the work in that everything was dynamically changing through time. And so all he had to do was narrate the story and just talk about what people were seeing. And it goes back to that kind of the aspect of visualization, trying to tell the story by capturing data in a way that just showing the data as is wouldn't be able to show. Now, I would put this at the extreme example of a perfect plot for a perfect problem. You may not be able to do this for everything, but what you do want is you want your plots to be able to show what's going on, to be able to say in more than a few words what is happening with your data and allow you to talk around it. That kind of, again, we go back to the presentation skills. I don't want my slide to tell me everything in words. I don't need the plot necessarily to tell the whole story, but I need the plot to give me enough to tell you the story. And in this case, that was what would happen here. As things moved, Hans would tell the story around it, what's happening, why things are moving, why things have changed. Look at this, look at that. And then people are more engaged with it. And when you're building plots, that is something I think that, you should take account of, so that, how that supports A, the story, and B, the engagement of your audience. Because what you're wanting is you're going to want the people to kind of have this as something that they're looking at and paying attention to, that you can then talk about. Now, this is obviously probably my favorite, but one of my other favorites, and I love these guys, informationisbeautiful.net. They do a lot of these kind of visualizations. And this isn't a plot per se, but I think it's super cool because it gets across a lot of information. And this is just one I found when I was doing these presentations. I hadn't seen this one because it was a COVID one. And I thought it's probably quite apt to put something in about this. And so what this is this is just probably, call it an infographic. It's a visualization. It's a visualization that has lots of data in a way that's trying to get across a message to you, the reader, of what's going on. Now, this is something much more that you could just look at and just read and understand. Yeah, but you get an idea just from the way they've used colors, they've used shapes, they've used sizes, and the way they've laid things out. It's very kind of intuitive. And I think this kind of thought of building these data visualizations beyond what would maybe be a standard plot is something that, we as data scientists should consider. I think the work these guys do is brilliant. I think, everything they do is great. And it's a combination of, data science in terms of, or maybe data journalism with development on top in terms of design. And, some of this is, not super easy to do, but there are things I think we can borrow from it as data scientists, and the ideas and the way they're trying to convey beyond those standard plots. And, a lot of times a histogram, a bar chart, a line plot, some kind of radar, they're all very good, but, depending on the concept we're trying to get across, is there something more that we can do to kind of get that out in a way where people can kind of see what we're trying to tell you and then talk around it? And all of this links back into, again, as I said before, the fact of you're letting this visualization do a lot of the work for you. People can see this and they can glean a lot from it, more than if this was in a table. You could put this in a table with height, the risk as a word, and it's not going to have the same effect. And so it's the ability to kind of understand what you're trying to get across. And these guys are great at telling data-driven stories. Check out their website. There's loads of cool stuff going on there. Lots of great plots. And if you ever get to see them do talks, really good, how they talk around what they're doing. But they just come up with really cool stuff. And so visualization, good practice. So I think probably from seeing a bad, a couple of good ones, there's some things that you can think about in terms of how you do visualizations. And I've talked a bit about those in terms of, what you should want to do with a visualization. But I think one of the kind of key things is you've got to use the right visualization for the data set you have. Now, I've put in there the good ones are two really complicated ones. Rosling one, which is, moves through time, and the information is beautiful one, which is a massive infographic. They're on the scale of, that's quite complicated to do. Your data set might not require that. So don't think you have to go over the top to get across what you want. But what your visualization should do is support the data that you have and the message that you want. It should tell a story. Now, good visualization can be complicated, like we've seen, but it doesn't need to be. If we go back to the Fox News example earlier, really, we didn't need that visualization. Did you need a visualization at all? A simple table could be all you need, but a visualization could work. It's going to draw the eye, it's going to keep people involved. And one thing about visualizations is if you're just looking at it, you will take it in. But with something like that, they have to understand what they're trying to show and what their story was. When you've got a lot of data where it's very tight, will you get the picture across in a certain visualization? And so understanding all of this, so everything links back together in terms of the story, what you're trying to communicate, understanding the key points, how that then links back to a visualization that needs to kind of take this into account. Everything kind of, all the points we've kind of covered, all kind of essentially link back into each other. And a lot of it is understanding of the concept that you want to communicate and having some key points you need to communicate from it. If you think about your problem, when you come and choose your visualization, when you look at the best way to get that across, everything becomes much simpler. And a bit of planning, I think, having an idea, thinking about what is going to be good for your presentation, your meeting, your media, your report, whatever this is going to go towards, planning what you want people to get out of it is going to be really, really key. So I think, hopefully today people have kind of got out of this some key points that are going to help them going forward. So in summary, communication is key as a data scientist. I think though the years, the time of people just wanting to work with data and being hidden in an office and just, churning away and doing things, I think that died a long time ago. I think, communication in the field of data science has never been more crucial. And I think, a lot of data scientists are good communicators. I'm sure everybody here is, communicate to their colleagues, but I think that kind of communication to a non-expert is something that, we should be much more comfortable with. It shouldn't be a big deal for a data scientist to talk about a data-driven concept, be it in the media or to senior management or to somebody outside their normal kind of remit, and being able to explain the concepts we're working with in a simple format that people can understand is really important. And, a lot of that communication is going to kind of come from having done stuff on it. Now, the other thing is thought should be taken around the message you want to convey. And I've kind of said this again and again, having the points you want to talk about, understanding the concept, think about it before you do it. I think probably if you look at bad visualizations, bad presentations, just bad kind of communication, it's where people haven't thought too much about what they want to say. They just know, I've got all this stuff I can say. Less is more. Keep it simple. Those kind of things have been really key throughout this presentation. And even when we go into the visualizations, what look complicated, actually they kept it fairly simple. The broad concepts of Rosling was, here are population sizes measured by bubbles essentially, and they change over time. It's quite an easy concept for people to understand, even if the graph itself to do is quite complicated. The information is beautiful example is just COVID risks, where bubble and color represent size and risk, lowest to highest. It's again an easy concept. Maybe the visualization was harder to do, but it's simple, it's good. And the concept of visualization can greatly aid your story, as you've kind of seen. A really good visualization can be your story, but for a lot of us, it would just be an aid in it, because we won't always be able to just have a single visualization like that. But we should think about those types of things when working with data and trying to tell the story. And I think my last point, which I'll stress again, and I've said a few times already, is good communication can be worked at, whether that's building better visualizations, whether that's being able to be more confident when you're talking, whether that's writing presentations. If you're not good at those things, just like if you're not good at anything, you have to work on the things that you're weak at or weaker at. And I really believe that communication is an easy win for a lot of people. We all have to talk in our roles, or communicate probably is the better way to put it. We have to communicate somehow. And so a lot of these skills can be worked at and we can get better at it. Do you have to be the greatest communicator? There is certainly not. But being effective doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the greatest. You just need to be effective to get your point across. Because when you do communicate, and who you communicate to they will want to know, they'll be engaged with you, with what you're saying, whether that be at work, whether that be doing a presentation, whether that be in the media. You know, if people are there listening and they're involved, they've got some engagement already. So it's just the point of view being effective enough to get your point across in a way people can understand. And I hope people have enjoyed this, and I hope people kind of take away the fact of any of you could be that next big communicator, and actually having those skills is going to make you much better as a data scientist. So thank you very much for your time.